finally gave in and started actually playing Lotro. So you know, it's why I chose Landreval, because I wanted to make sure to be on the same server with you guys. So anyway, I always will sort of feel at home with the Lonely Mountain Band. Always happy to talk with you guys. So just to sort of emphasize, I want to make sure everybody knows kind of how this is supposed to work. We can do some interaction in game and stuff, but of course, especially since my character is still striving to get to the field, the correct layer on the field. That, you know, a way that you can make comments or ask questions as I go along. I always enjoy and appreciate comments from the audience as I'm talking. Go ahead and enter that into the text channel that we've set up on Discord. I think you guys have all been given the address to that. So if you go to the Ales and Tales text channel, and I can see, I've got that open here, so I can see when you come in. So okay, hang on, wait, I do. All right, okay. I think I'm in the correct layer now, so now I'm running myself down to the field. So there we are. This is very exciting. I also wanted to add, I'm also broadcasting this on the Signum Twitch channel, which is our home Twitch channel. So we should be able to see us and hear me there as well. So, all right. So I'm talking about Yule stuff tonight. It's the Yule festival, and you know, we're less than a week away from Christmas. So I wanted to talk about Yule, and the first thing I wanted to start off with is, of course, a small trivia question. I'm sure many of you know the answer to this trivia question, but does anyone remember what happened on December 25th in The Lord of the Rings? Who remembers the very noteworthy event that took place? And here we are. I see you all. Hooray! Okay. Excellent. There we are. Oh, I see. There's Maven. I see. I'll stand up on the side of the slope up here. Okay, there we are. So welcome. Good to see you guys all in game here. This character here in my green starter cloak here, starter robe, is Narnion, my new Loremaster. Okay, so as I was saying, trivia question: what happened on December 25th in the great year, in the year of the primary year of the plot of the Lord of the Rings? Does anybody recall? Does anyone remember the event, very, very noteworthy event that took place on December 25th? I'm not seeing anybody entering it in the text chat there. There, you got it. Finn has it. Very good. The December 25th, Christmas Day, is the day that the Fellowship left Rivendell. Exactly. And it's interesting because there are very few. There are several people. I know Tom Shippey has, said this on several different occasions, that he just can't believe that that's an accident. That December 25th would be the day that was chosen, especially since there's another Catholic holiday, which happens to be March 25th, the day that the ring was destroyed, and sort of the way in which the quest of the ring bearer is kind of framed by these two very significant Christian holidays is something which Shippey has always said that he just can't think to be accidental, and neither can I. But it's just kind of a little Easter egg buried in Appendix B. Really, no one ever mentions it, of course, during the actual text. But anyway, so I wanted to do a couple different things here tonight. First, I wanted to talk about Yule and Christmas, but the main thing is there's not much to say about Yule and Christmas in The Lord of the Rings. There's, of course, the references to the primary references to Yule. Well, there's only like one or two references to Yule. One, of course, is to the reference that there was much more cheer at Yule, the year of the Scouring of the Shire, than anyone had dared to hope for, but that's kind of it. So we do we are given from that one very brief reference the idea that hobbits in the Shire are celebrate Yule, and that Yule celebration involves cheer, which obviously means significant quantities of food and drink, because that was what was in question, right? What was in question was the quantity of food and drink that was going to be available because of all the gathering and sharing that had happened during the harvest that year, and throughout the summer, that it just wasn't going to be, it wasn't going to be a merry Yule that year. But again, that's kind of it. I mean, the only other thing that we see, of course, is if you go to Appendix, Appendix D, the calendar one, right? And learn about the calendar of the Shire, you can see how Yule and Midsummer both have their own, the live and the and Yule both have their own sort of separate calendar units, so that Yule is this annual celebration, which is not just a day in a month, but is its own sort of extra monthly period of days. So, which suggests something, right, about the status of Yule in Shire culture. But that's, again, really all we kind of learn about it. There's just not much else that we know for sure. There's the only other thing that we get about Christmas is that I can think of within Tolkien stories themselves is that one reference in The Hobbit, which is of course not a reference to Middle-earth culture at all, but is one of the anachronistic references by the narrator. You may remember that originally the trees that the dwarves are hiding up, in the out of the frying pan into the fire chapter are compared to Christmas trees. And that's it. That's like the only reference that we get. So there's not too much to say. Again, we can say a little bit about what we sort of deduce from it. So, but that's really kind of it. And there's not much more. So therefore, with the sort of absence of actual sort of Christmas content in The Lord of the Rings, there were two things that I wanted to do. One is we don't get to talk too much about Yule and Christmas in The Lord of the Rings, but we can talk about winter, and that'll be kind of fun. And then the other thing is talking about Christmas in Tolkien, but outside of The Lord of the Rings, and that is I'd like to say a couple things about the Father Christmas letters, which are awesome. So, but first let's talk about winter. I wanted to do a little reading of a poem that I've never done a close reading of before. And that is, of course, Bilbo's winter poem that he recites to Frodo. Now, I want to talk about the poem, but let me read the whole paragraph that the poem is set in. Of course, it's Bilbo and Frodo in The Ring Goes South talking about leaving Rivendell. Sam has just gloomily said, "We'll just wait long enough for winter to come." "That can't be helped," said Bilbo. It's your fault partly, Frodo, my lad, insisting on waiting for my birthday. A funny way of honoring it, I can't help thinking. Not the day I should have chosen for letting the SBs into Bag End, but there it is. You can't wait now till spring, and you can't go till the reports come back. And then he bursts into poetry. "When winter first begins to bite and stones crack in the frosty night, when pools are black and trees are bare, 'tis evil in the wild to fare. But that, I'm afraid, will be just your luck." Okay, so let's start with the poem, and then let's kind of come back to the context. Now, if you listen to the poem, there are several things about the poem which are very kind of sort of classic Tolkienian elements. It's just, it's a few lines of verse, right? So let's notice the structure, because that's always interesting in looking at Tolkien's poetry. Tolkien was had such a careful ear for verse and for meter, and did so much playing around with it in his different poems. Now, one thing that you will notice when you hear it, if you hear carefully and you are at all interested in poetic meter, you can pick up the rhythm of these lines pretty clearly. "When winter first begins to bite and stones crack in the frosty night, when pools are black and trees are bare, 'tis evil in the wild to fare." The first and the third lines, particularly, especially the third line, are almost perfect lines of their kind. This is iambic tetrameter, one of Tolkien's favorite meters. "When pools are black and trees are bare." Bum 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 bum. 4 beats per line in an iambic pattern. unstressed, stressed, when pools are black and trees are bare. So it's an iambic tetrameter. Now that's interesting because it certainly suggests who wrote this poem. Right, that is, I would say this is clearly a poem of Bilbo's own composition. Now we have reasons to suspect that anyway, right? For several reasons. We're told in chapter 1 of the Fellowship of the Ring that Bilbo is always liable to work in bits of what he calls poetry, right, into any speech that he gives. So when he does burst into poetry, that shouldn't surprise us, right? Given the introduction to that we get. The other thing, of course, is that, again, it would seem sort of altogether typical of what he would do, but if we've been paying attention to this point, we will have noticed, or should have noticed, that this is exactly the style of poetry that Bilbo so often recites. Iambic tetrameter is what I call, in the Lord of the Rings, what I call hobbit meter. It's not that only hobbits do poetry in iambic tetrameter, nor is it quite true that all hobbit poetry is in iambic tetrameter, but there is a very strong correlation between the two. Most hobbit poetry is in iambic tetrameter, so it sounds like it. It's if you go back to those the songs that Frodo sings, the walking song, and all those hobbit songs that we get, especially in the first 4 or 5 chapters, they're almost all in this same meter. Again, there are some exceptions, but most of them are not exceptions. So again, it seems like this is a Bilbo poem. Now, if you look at the rhyme scheme, right, it seems really simple, right? It's just 2 rhyming couplets: bite, night, bear, fair, right? But if you listen to it, you can hear a much more complicated sound scheme going on in there, and this is where you can see some of the sort of the classic Tolkien wordplay going on in there. Listen for the internal rhyme and for the repetition of sounds as well. When winter first begins to bite and stones crack in the frosty night, when pools are black and trees are bare, 'tis evil in the wild to fare. Okay, so what are some things? What are some things that you notice? If you and again, feel free to any observations that you have. It's not just questions. Any observations that you have or things that you're thinking, go ahead and type them into the text chat. Again, as I said, I can see those there as we go along. Gilgalier, I see your question there. I'll come back to that in a second. Though, spoiler, you're absolutely correct. But anyway, so again, listening to this, first you'll notice the alliteration in that first line, when winter first begins to bite, with the repetition of the B. And then notice how he picks up that same alliteration in line 4. So line 1 and line 4, both of them have, so when winter first begins to bite, and when pools are black and trees are bare. Notice how these, so first of all, the overall structure of the verses, right? These first 3 lines all go together, right? That is, if you look at sort of the sense of the thing, the first 3 lines of these 4 lines are all describing the experience of winter, right? What you experience with various senses. And they all lead up, it's all one sentence, right? When this happens, and this happens, when this happens, then your conclusion in the 4th line, right? 'Tis evil in the wild to fare. So so the sense of the lines divides them, the first 3 lines all together in a group, and then the last line. And when we look at those first lines, we can see and hear the kind of balance, right? When winter first begins to bite and stones crack in the frosty night, when pools are black and trees are bare. That 3rd line, we have the 2 things, right? When pools are black and trees are bare, which are paralleled with the alliteration again, with the B alliteration, right? And the 1st and 3rd lines are paralleled with each other. So the first 2 lines juxtapose 2 different images. When winter first begins to bite, and stones crack in the frosty night. And then the 3rd line gives us 2 more shorter ones in one line. When pools are black and trees are bare. And notice the picture that all of this paints for us. Bilbo, in his poem, is giving us not just a concept of winter. What he's focusing on is the physical experience of winter. Right? Notice how the first line gives us a tactile image, right? What it feels like when winter first begins to bite, right? And then we get a sound image, and stones crack in the frosty night. And then we get 2 visual images in line 3, when pools are black and trees are bare, 'tis evil in the wild to fare. But notice, of course, we have the internal rhyme there. So again, I just love how, and Tolkien loves to do this, to tie his lines all closely up together in different ways, right? So it doesn't sound repetitive or, sort of annoying, but yet the lines are really intimately tied up together. So you've got that alliteration, the B alliteration, tying line 1 and 3, but then you've got an internal rhyme tying lines 2 and 3, right? Stones crack and pools are black, right? So all of these things go together. The feel of it, the sound of it, the cracking sound of freezing cold rocks, right? The sight of the black pools, right? A pool that is covered in really thick ice, such that it looks black, right, when you look down into it, and the bare trees all around you. 'Tis evil in the wild to fare. Now, So what does this give you? It gives you an explanation, right? It's the sentence is just it's evil to fare in the wild, right? It's really bad to be out in the wild in wintertime, right? Is the substance, right? The meaning of this really simple poem. But you'll notice how Bilbo brings this home, right? With all of these different senses. This is what it sounds like. This is what it looks like. This is what it feels like to be out in winter. It's this sort of 3-line immersion into the sense of winter, right? The feeling and everything of winter. And so it sort of explains why. It doesn't just tell you that it's evil in the wild to fare. It helps to sort of show you to help you to kind of understand on this visceral level why exactly it's evil to fare in the wild in the wintertime. But all of this is really kind of funny in the context, right? Well, I mean, like Sam probably doesn't think it's funny, right? He's already gloomy about the fact that they're going to be traveling in winter because, he knows how bad winter can be, and Sam certainly seems to have enough imagination to guess that it's going to be pretty darn evil faring in the wild in wintertime, right? And here's Bilbo apparently kind of rubbing it in, right? I mean, you can't wait till spring and you can't go till the reports come back. And you'd think his next move would be like, cheer up, Frodo, or like, let's like put the best face we can on this, right? Or, it's best to put a bold face on it, as Puddleglum might have said, to switch my metaphors. But no, that's not what Bilbo does, right? Instead, he launches into this poem. I don't know if we're supposed to understand that this poem was extemporaneous, right? Did he make up this poem on the spur of the moment, or did he just pull this poem out of his sort of poetic reservoir at this time? Had he written this a while before? Is it in fact somebody else's poem, or is this a translation of some other poem or phrase or something? We don't really know. It sounds almost like it could be. It sounds almost like a rhyme of lore, right? The tall ships and tall kings 3 times 3 kind of thing, right? But it's not, and it doesn't sound like that either. This is in Hobbit meter. It's not in the same meter. It doesn't sound like the poems of lore usually do. Which, if you know poetic meter, they tend to be trochaic for some reason, and I don't know why. It's one of the things that I'm really kind of interested in looking at the poetry in the Lord of the Rings. Anyway, but so why does he reach for? I don't know, but like the overall effect of this can't be very comforting. It's certainly the opposite of comforting, you would think, right? And then he finishes up with, "But that, I am afraid, will be just your luck," right? And I don't know, like, what exactly is motivating Bilbo. Gandalf's response, "I am afraid it will," said Gandalf. "We can't start until we have found out about the riders." And of course they go on and talk about the riders and go on to set up Book 4 of the epic quest line. But I love the fact that, and thinking about this not just from Bilbo's point of view, but thinking about this from Tolkien's point of view, right? Why does Tolkien reach for poetic lines here, right? Why do we get the insertion of this verse into the story at this point, right? And why does he give it to Bilbo at this point? And I don't have any really like very definite answers to that question, but I think that kind of thing is always really, really interesting to think about. it's a really neat effect. It certainly, a few things that I would say about it. It certainly, again, helps with the characterization of Bilbo, right? I like it fits with the kind of Hobbit wit, right? I mean, he's giving Frodo a hard time all the way through, right? A funny way of honoring it, I can't help thinking. Not the day I should have chosen. So, I mean, he's already ragging on Frodo, right? And then he sort of follows this up with, let's just, let me invoke in your imagination how awful you're going to have it on your trip, right? I mean, is kind of, but that kind of, that kind of teasing. You think about the way that the Hobbit friends all talk to each other, and we get references to this later on as well. Remember when Gimli and Legolas and Aragorn are reunited with Merry and Pippin in the ruins of Isengard, and Theoden and the others all laugh and they say, there can be no doubt that we see the meeting of dear friends. And you remember what is it that led Theoden to conclude that, right? What is it that gave him the impression that these are dear friends being reunited? It's how they insult each other, right? This is right after Gimli's, you woolly-footed and wool-pated truants line. So yeah, I mean that's just that's the way it is. Gilgalad, exactly. Isn't that how all friends greet each other? Well, it certainly does seem to be actually how Tolkien went on with his friends. If you hear, like in the letters of C.S. Lewis and Tolkien to each other, they rag on each other in that kind of way all the time. That seems to be actually fairly typical of them. Now, Finn, I like your suggestion that it's just another way to set the reader's the reader's mind to the fact that it's not going to be a Hobbit walking party. Yes, it is. Sort of pointing to what's coming later, right? So we kind of think about it both in the moment, right, like as something that Bilbo says to Frodo, but also, of course, the way that Tolkien is inviting us to do. And of course, this is the chapter, right? This is the beginning of the Ring Goes South. So we're going to get to Carothras and the pass, the pass in the snow and the blizzard on the mountainside. So we're going to get to winter, right? So on the one hand, this really sets that up really effectively because it invites us as readers already to be imagining the sights and sounds and the feel of winter cold, so that when we get to it later in the chapter, we will already kind of have that accessible. Anyway, that's what I wanted to say about the poem. Let's see. The Cookie Mama has an interesting question about how Hobbit poetry compares to Michael Williams' take on Kender from Dragonlance. I don't know. I don't think I know Michael Williams' poetry enough to know. I mean, I've read Dragonlance and I know Kender, which are wonderful. For me, Kender are the absolute best part of the Dragonlance series. I absolutely love the Kender in that series, but I don't recall their poetry clearly enough to be able to do a metrical comparison off the top of my head. So sorry about that. And the other point that Gilgalad, that you were making before was about another Christmas reference, and you're right, I had forgotten that one, but it's another anachronistic Christmas reference in The Hobbit, not in the published Hobbit now, or at least the published Hobbit that you'll see nowadays, but in the first edition of The Hobbit. In the first edition of The Hobbit, yes, it is true that Elrond was originally called as kind as Christmas. In the published Hobbit, you may remember in the description of Elrond, he's called as kind as summer. But originally he was as kind as Christmas in the first edition. Yes, that's true. But again, that doesn't even really tell us anything about Middle-earth associations with Yule or Christmas or anything of the kind, because it's just the modern narrator speaking to us, the modern readers. There are a bunch of things which are often called anachronisms in The Hobbit, or The Lord of the Rings, which are not really anachronisms because they're not internal to the story. Again, the narrator of both of those books, both The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, is within the fictional frame of the story a modern person, right, who is just merely compiling and translating the texts. So a thing that the narrator says, or a metaphor or simile that the narrator makes. So when the dragon firework in chapter 1 is compared to the sound, makes a sound which is compared to the sound of an express train going by, that's not an anachronism exactly, because it's not within the story. It's just what the narrator is telling us it sounds like, right? And both the narrator and we, the readers, are modern. Anyway, so the kind as Christmas description of Elrond in the first edition of The Hobbit is like that, just as is the description, the comparison of the dwarves' trees to Christmas trees. Yeah, exactly. Well, as I said, I wanted to also kind of transition out and talk about the Father Christmas letters. So first, let me just ask, how many of you know the Father Christmas letters? If you know the Father Christmas letters, either, jump up and down, or, throw flower petals in the air or something like that. So I'd like to just kind of see who knows them, right? We got a few people, a few jumpers up and down, right? Okay, just a couple, not too many. All right, well, if you haven't read the Father Christmas letters, you absolutely should. In fact, I strongly recommend that it's one of those things that you can't really do justice to without the visual medium, because there are several editions of the book that you can get which are just absolutely gorgeous. So I just kind of hold it up so that the people watching the Twitch stream can see, because of course Tolkien not only wrote these but very lavishly illustrated them as well. So for those of you who aren't familiar, let me just kind of explain briefly what this is. This is a totally private undertaking that Tolkien did. This was never intended for publication. They were only published after Tolkien died. And what this was just a private thing that he did with his kids. Every year, he would write them a letter that was supposed to be from Father Christmas, from Santa Claus, and he would leave it, right? So they would find the letter from Father Christmas, like on the table by the fireplace in the morning when they woke up on Christmas morning. And so they're dated one per year, and they tended to be the very first one is a picture, a painting that Tolkien painted of sort of a portrait of Santa Claus, and then an accompanying letter which is fairly short. It's addressed to John, the oldest son, and it's just the very first letter, which is super short. Just is like, hi, I just want to say Merry Christmas, and this is I've enclosed a picture of me that I painted, and that's it's very simple. And as time goes on, they get, not only do the letters get more and more elaborate, but the pictures get more and more elaborate. And he starts, the pictures themselves are gorgeous. Like, for instance, Father Christmas tends to have his hands tend to shake because he's very old, and often sometimes it's very cold at the North Pole as well, so he'll be kind of shivering as well. And so Tolkien will do the whole letter in these wiggly letters, this wiggly script, to imitate Father Christmas's shaky hand. And he draws things in the margin and often beautiful ornate designs around the edge, so it looks like a medieval manuscript. It's just incredible work. So anyway, I won't tell you everything about the Father Christmas. There's no way I could in this time. But there's one thing I wanted to just to mention about them in order to illustrate, because I think the Father Christmas letters are a fascinating illustration of something, and just to kind of see the kind of thing that you can get even from something as sort of simple as the Father Christmas letter, something which was not designed by Tolkien to be, as I said, a story he was ever going to publish. The thing that I think is really neat is the Father Christmas letters give us a glimpse into Tolkien's story-making process, which I think is really unique among all of Tolkien's works. If you read them, cover to cover, if you read them year by year, all the way through from the earliest ones, when his eldest son John was quite young, all the way through in the 40s, he finishes them during World War II. So they start in the early, 1921, I think? I'm just checking here my book to make sure I'm remembering. 1920. I was close. In 1920 is his first one. In the mid 1940s, when Priscilla is growing up now, she's the only one left in the house, but she's getting older. She's a teenager at that point. When he stops writing them. Anyway, so if you read them all through, you can see some really interesting patterns developing. One of the things that you, and again, if you don't have the Twitch channel, I encourage you to look at the Twitch channel for a second, because I'm gonna put up a couple of the pictures on the Twitch channel. One of the things that we can see at the beginning is that he's not at first making up stories for his kids. That's it. He gets there, but that's not where it begins. The letters from Father Christmas are not ultimately a story that he's writing. They start off as pictures that he's drawing, and then those are accompanied by descriptions. So let me give you an example. This is a fairly early one. This is, for those of you who know the Father Christmas letters, this is the one where the North Polar Bear stumbles down the stairs. Now, the North Polar Bear is like the runaway star who completely steals the show of the Father Christmas letters. He's everybody's favorite character. My favorite letters are the ones where the North Polar Bear writes editorializing comments in the margins of Father Christmas's narrative. And Tolkien writes this like different kind of angular hand for the North Polar Bear when the North Polar Bear breaks in. He's just awesome. And the kids obviously love the North Polar Bear. So this one that I'm showing it's a very elaborate picture of the North Polar Bear having fun. He's lying at the bottom of the stairs, and the stairs are all covered with presents, and you see Father Christmas looking very surprised at the top of the stairs, like he just run down the hall and has turned the corner to see, because he just heard the terrible crash, and he's looking down at the destruction as the North Polar Bear has gone down the stairs carrying all of the presents and dropped them and fallen and crushed them all. Of course, one of the recurring themes of the Father Christmas letters is why the boys aren't getting all of the presents that they asked for, right? So they sent Father Christmas a letter requesting all of these things, and they almost never, because Tolkien was poor, so they almost never get all the things that they ask for. And so Tolkien invents these elaborate explanations for why they don't get all they do, like the year the goblins broke into the basement and destroyed all the presents, and North Polar Bear is responsible for many of the disasters that happen at the North Pole, which either set things back or destroy some of the presents or all that kind of thing. Anyway, so the letter for this year, which is 1928, if I'm reading the top there correctly, the letter for this year is essentially a gloss on this painting. I mean, the whole it's very clear Tolkien did this painting first, and then he wrote the letter describing the things. So even the icicles and things, the colors, the red and the blue on this frieze here, when the North Polar Bear makes a joke on frieze, F-R-I-E-Z-E and F-R-E-E-Z-E, because it's the North Pole, right? Anyway, so even that's described in the letter, and the letter contains things like, you can see how North Polar Bear has fallen and all that stuff. So again, in the early going, we get pictures followed by a letter that say, oh, so I included here's a picture I made for you, right? And then the pictures get more and more elaborate, and we get these longer, so we have to have a whole story behind what happened in this picture, right? And how did this scene depicted in this picture come about, right? But then, as time goes on, the stories begin to kind of take over, right? The adventures of North Polar Bear and Father Christmas, and the goblins that come in, and the elves who help them fight them, and of course we get the famous scene as depicted here in this other image of North Polar Bear fighting the goblins during the goblin incursion. So these are the elves. The guys in red are the elves, and the black creatures are goblins. And there's North Polar Bear, swollen to giant size, almost like Bjorn, kicking and punting and chucking the goblins everywhere. He makes, North Polar Bear makes some marginal comments about how much he enjoyed all this. But anyway, so and this bottom one is just a later scene in the story. By the time we get up to here, this is in the 30s, 1933, if I remember correctly, when this story happens. So even just within a few, by 5 years later, the stories have completely swollen and have taken things over, right? So now Tolkien is telling stories, and he's including paintings still, which he's made himself for his kids, but they are now paintings which are illustrations of the stories, not stories which give you the background of the paintings. And the thing is, I think that this is actually kind of how Tolkien's mind works. I think that we can see evidence that Tolkien's bigger stories often kind of happen this way too. That he has these pictures, he has these images. He's like a landscape painter, right? Who pictures these things, and then the stories kind of grow out of those things. And I think you can see even in some of his Hobbit illustrations some similar kind of evidence of the same kind of thing. But again, you can kind of see it. There's a way in which the Father Christmas letters serve as a kind of I don't know, like laboratory case almost of the way that that Tolkien's stories and pictures are kind of related to each other. It's really interesting. I'm not going to, do a sort of a description or talk about the entire Father Christmas letters. I would just sort of leave you with two things about that. First and foremost, again, if you haven't read them, do. They're wonderful to read with your kids if you want to do that. I know Gilguir mentioned he was going to be reading them with your daughter this year. That's a great idea. I think it's really neat. So definitely can't recommend getting a copy of the Father Christmas letters strongly enough. And just the other, if you'd like to hear more about it, I did give a full hour-and-a-half lecture on the Father Christmas letters last fall. I recorded that. So if you go to the Signum University YouTube channel, you can find that. It's in the Mythgard Academy series. I just did a one-shot class, one session on the Father Christmas letters, so you can find them there. If you want to hear me say more about that. Anyway, okay. So I'd be happy to take questions. If you guys have questions, it doesn't have to be related to what I've been talking about or related to your Christmas or winter in any way. If you have totally unrelated questions you'd like to ask me about, I'd be happy to carry on doing that until they drag me off the stage. So Tony, I'll start with your question. Tony asks, on the Christmas theme, can I talk about Tolkien's disapproval of Lewis's shoehorning Santa Claus for Father Christmas into Narnia? Yes, and so now clearly the Father Christmas letters demonstrate quite plainly that his problem was not just that he was anti-Santa Claus, right? Or that, he doesn't disapprove of Father Christmas on religious grounds or something like that, right? Again, sometimes people will sort of depict Tolkien like, he's some kind of conservative or fuddy-duddy or something or other. This is not the case, right? His objection to Father Christmas's appearance in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe seems merely to be one of, oh, there we are. Thank you, Gilguir. Gilguir just posted a link to my Father Christmas lecture, so there you are. Anyway, okay, so the Santa Claus, Narnia, right? Okay, so the objection that Tolkien seems to have here is one of, I guess I would say, propriety, really. Tolkien and Lewis had a lot of things in common. Of course, they had many interests in common. They loved many of the same things. They enjoyed talking about the same things. They were wonderful friends and supporters of each other. But they thought very differently. They had very different minds from each other. And you can see this in lots and lots of different ways. But one of the ways in which they are very different is that Lewis was very sort of loose. He tended to be, if he would err on the side of being slapdash, right? Whereas I don't think that Tolkien ever did slapdash, ever. That just wasn't a thing that Tolkien did. maybe you can, no, but no, I mean, like, it's just not him. That's not who he is. And he hates it. So one of the things that he disliked most about Narnia, again, when people talk about, like, why did Tolkien hate Narnia, he didn't exactly hate Narnia. He just didn't like it. Like, it didn't like do anything for him. Right. And he just kind of disliked the Narnia books. So why did he hate Narnia? Again, people talk about how he didn't like allegory, and the Chronicles of Narnia are allegories, and so that's why he didn't like them. Well, that's not exactly true either, because first of all, they're not allegory exactly. It's just both Lewis and Tolkien would have objected to that, and that's not what he disliked about them anyway. What he didn't like about it is that they are a fearsome jumble. You get all these different things mingled together into one pot in Narnia, right? You get the dwarves, like the dwarf who is driving just think about The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, right? The dwarf who is driving the sledge of the White Witch is very much like a dwarf from Norse mythology, right? But just in the same scene, or like a chapter before, we got a faun, Tumnus, who is a Greek faun, right? And he has a Greek name, and there are other fauns with Greek names, and he's got books about Silenus and stuff on his shelf, right? So you've got this Greco-Roman faun, and then you've got this Eddaic dwarf, right? And you've got giants and witches and talking animals, and then Santa Claus comes in the middle of the thing. And you can just see Tolkien, like, not exactly pulling his hair out, but I can, he said that he wishes it lay within the range of his sympathy, right? But sympathy, like, he can't feel it, right? Tolkien can't get himself to do this. This just fundamentally doesn't work for Tolkien. He loves things to be consistent and to work together, right? This is why he disliked The Hobbit. Was too slapdash for him. In retrospect, he felt like The Hobbit was really slapdash, right? Because he chucked all these things together, and you've got because the dwarves are from the Eddas, right? They have all these Eddaic names. Like, the names really kind of bothered him, right? How you have these Old Norse names for the dwarves and for Gandalf, but it's not in, like, a consistently Norse world, right? And you've got stuff from his own mythologies kind of mingled in. So in Tolkien's own mind, The Hobbit is kind of risque from this standpoint, in this kind of way, just not really fully integrated, and not really working together in ways that he, later on would really have preferred that it be, right? And then but, like, The Hobbit is like small potatoes compared to Narnia when it comes to just mingling stuff together. And I have always disagreed with Tolkien. Well, first of all, I've always disagreed with him about The Hobbit. He always said, and began saying by the 40s and 50s, how much he disliked the narrator of The Hobbit. I think he's dead wrong about the narrator of The Hobbit. I love the narrator of The Hobbit. So I just totally disagree with him in his assessment of The Hobbit. And obviously I do not find Narnia outside the area of my sympathies. And what's really kind of interesting to me is that he does what Lewis is doing in Narnia is, to me, really interesting, and actually very much in line with the kind of thing that Tolkien was really interested in. That is, thinking about myth and the relationship between myth and our world, right? Clearly, when the kids go to Narnia, what we find in Narnia, in a sense, is the reality behind some of the myths that are there in our real world. So, like, Mr. Tumnus is not a faun from Greek mythology, exactly. Right? Instead, what Mr. Tumnus is something like the truth behind the garbled stories that have come down into our world, right? Based on, these sort of mixed up glimpses that people have somehow gotten of the reality. That seems to be the kind of implication of a lot of the stuff that we see in Narnia. And it's an idea that it would seem to me would really appeal to Tolkien, but it never really did. But yeah, so Forte Maestro says Narnia is a new geographical land, but all the creatures seem to be taken from everything. While Tolkien does share many myths, 90% of his content is original. Yes, and what I would say, Forte, is that Tolkien had much more of the pure mythopoeic impulse, right? Just this desire to make myth and to make, world building was like his thing. It was not Lewis's thing to the same extent. Lewis approved of it, liked it, did a lot of it, but it was not it was not nearly so much like the core, his imaginative core, what he was trying to do. But like I said, they think very differently, and that's certainly one of them. Yeah, exactly. Forte goes on to say Narnia is taking from myths, while Tolkien aimed to create his own mythology. Yes, now, not Tolkien created his own mythology not without relation to other mythologies, right? I mean, there are links and echoes that we can see, but yeah, he was certainly not just interested in thinking about those kind of direct relationships, right? I mean, indeed, the Father Christmas scene is really interesting. In fact, it's the point that it's the example that I would point to as one of the things which illustrates most clearly the relationship between myth and truth, between myth and story in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, right? Because when they meet him, they find that he's real, and he fulfills in some ways their expectations based on the stories that they know of Father Christmas from their world. But he's the reality behind those stories, and we see that much more directly. And Father Christmas himself even comments on it, like the relationship between himself and the stories about him, right? So yeah, I mean, I'm really fascinated by that. I love what Lewis is doing with myth, and he does it less as he goes along. Once we get out of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, it's like the very first story, Narnia story that Lewis wrote. He's doing this kind of playing with mythology from all over the place, but then he kind of imaginatively inhabits the world of Narnia much more consistently moving forward. It never loses all those different elements that it has from the beginning, but it ceases to be this like sort of continually growing hodgepodge, right? And he just kind of begins to flesh out the hodgepodge that he started with at the beginning. Yeah, good. Excellent. Yeah, good. Let's see. Birka asked a lore music question. Does Tolkien's Song of Durin's Awakening appear anywhere else than in the trilogy? That's a really fascinating... Well, it's a question with a really fascinating answer. No. Okay, that's not the fascinating answer. No, the whole poem does not appear anywhere else. Gimli is reciting it. We are given the impression that this is only one small... As we are so often given the impression, this is only one small piece of a longer poem. And he could go on, but he's not gonna, right? And the thing is, when Tolkien talks like that, right? When we're told, there's a great deal more of it, but I'm not gonna recite it just now. Sometimes that's fake, right? That is, sometimes there isn't really, right? But nevertheless, the impression that this is only a small selection of a much greater poem is still a really important idea for Tolkien to bring into the story. But sometimes it's real, right? Sometimes Tolkien really has written a lot more of the poetry, and he really is only giving one little snippet of it. And Gimli's song is a really interesting kind of example of this. The passage, at least one of the verses, is derived almost entirely from a poem that Tolkien wrote, but a totally different poem about a totally different thing, which is really interesting in context. So Gimli's poem about Durin and about Khazad-dûm, guess what it originally described? It originally described an elf and an elf king, not Durin at all. The lines that are description. Where are they? I'll make sure to start them. Exactly. Gilgir, they're from the Lay of Lathian. So let me just glance ahead here since I have the book here at my elbow. Yes, a king he was, uncarven throne in many pillared halls of stone, with golden roof and silver floor and runes of power upon the door. Let's see, and that whole their delver mined, their mason built, their beryl pearl and opal pale and metal wrought like fish's mail, all that stuff. It's taken from the Lay of Leithian. It's the description of Thingol's. It's the description of Menegroth in the Lay of Leithian. And Tolkien takes that whole section, which is describing the King of the Elves and his underground palace, and transposes it, puts it into Gimli's song, which is now about Durin and about Khazad-dûm, and it fits better the second time. Right. I mean, it works better, I think, as a description of Durin than it did of Thingol originally. But it's one of those things which, when you come across it, like when you read the Lay of Leithian for the first time and you come across that passage, you're like, holy cow, what? And like, what's the Song of Durin doing suddenly embedded in the middle of this? But the thing is, that's very typical Tolkien. Tolkien was an inveterate recycler. Right, he rarely forgets and leaves behind ideas that he once had. So if he writes something and then rejects it, he just totally moves on from it. Right, he'll often bring it back. This is one of the reasons, I think, as I've argued many times before, this is one of the reasons that we get the references or apparent references to Silmarillion material in The Hobbit, or what would seem to be things which are taken right out of the Silmarillion, like, for instance, the Arkenstone, which sounds exactly like a Silmaril, or the struggle, the problem between the Wood Elves and dwarves of old, which sounds shockingly like the problems that Thingol of Doriath had with the dwarves back in the day, or the references to Gondolin, or the use of Elrond's name, any of that stuff. These are not really references to Silmarillion stuff. This is Tolkien recycling material, right? Because he, at that point, doesn't really seem to be at all confident that this is ever going to get published. So the Silmarillion stuff, I mean. So he recycles. He just takes this stuff. And so here we have an example. He's doing a Song of Durin, right? And he has these lines. Right, these lines about the king uncarven throne in many pillared halls of stone, and so he's like, "Oh man, yeah." So he transposes it, right? He takes it from the Lay of Leithian and slaps it onto Durin in Gimli's song. So that's why it's a really interesting answer about that particular poem, because although we don't have like a full-length version of the Song of Durin's Awakening, we do get more poetry. It does have a source, an epic poem source that we do have, but not one that Gimli would want credit for. Yeah, good. So yeah. Gilglir points out one of the most shocking example of Tolkien's recycling material, which is that in the very first draft of chapter 1 of The Hobbit, when he first tells the story of Bolrorer Took, the name of the goblin king who gets decapitated by Bolrorer, and has his head knocked off and rolls into a rabbit hole, and thus the battle is won and the game of golf invented at the same time. The name that he gives to the Goblin King is Fingolfin, because it contains the syllable golf in the middle of it, which is, like part of the joke, right? That's why it's called golf, because it's named after the Goblin King whose head got knocked off and down a hole, right? And so he makes up the name Golfimble eventually and replaces it, but he used the word Fingolfin the first time, and the idea that he was willing to take the name of Fingolfin, right, the great elf king, and slap it onto a decapitated Goblin King whose name is a gag, right? His name is just only there for a pun. Sort of shows you how freely Tolkien was willing to kind of borrow from himself and recycle material and everything. Yeah, good. So let's see. Oh, I see. Goglir is troubled that elves in Lotro leave footprints in the snow. Yeah, it's true. It's true. You're right. I hadn't really been thinking about that, but you're right. That is a detail. I wonder we should ask Chris Pearson. I was going to say at Turbine, but I guess I shouldn't say that anymore. Anyway, we should ask Chris Pearson why elves leave footprints. I don't know. I can't tell you. Seems like they shouldn't. I agree. Okay. All right. Tony has another question. And by the way, I've completely, as is my wont when I'm talking about Tolkien, lost entire track of time. So, Maven and Birka, you can feel free to give me the hook at any point, or, start jumping up and down in the back and telling me it's time to leave. Anyway, but in the meantime, I'm gonna answer Tony's question. Tony has an unrelated lore question. Gandalf says there are nameless things under the earth that are older than Sauron, but if Sauron and Gandalf are Ainur, how can anything be older than them since they were in the timeless halls? Great question, Tony. It's related to the question about, there's some people who will debate who's older, Tom Bombadil or Treebeard, right? Because they're both called eldest. Right, Tom Bombadil calls himself oldest and fatherless, right, and Celeborn calls Treebeard eldest, right. So which one is older, right? And yeah. So first of all, it seems to me pretty clear that when you've got a bunch of immortal spirits who are all there in the Timeless Hall who predate Arda, these spirits who predate Arda, the question of age, who's older, is really a totally meaningless question. I mean, the whole flow of time, it appears to be alien to them in some sense. So yeah, it's not a question of eldest in that kind of absolute sense. The question of old, I think, must be taken to be relative to time within Arda, basically. So he who is eldest would be he who entered Arda earliest, right? I think is really the only way in which we can kind of measure things. From to kind of compare the ages of things in the book. So I don't think that there's any real competition between Treebeard and Tom Bombadil, for instance. I think that the two of them, because of course the two of them are completely different categories of creature, right? When Tom Bombadil calls himself oldest and fatherless, right? Remember, he's talking to hobbits, right? So when he calls himself fatherless, I think he's kind of giving them sort of an indication. Because remember, they're asking, who are you, right? That's what Frodo's asking. He's like, who are you? And it's clear that that Frodo is trying to parse. Tolkien was trying to parse this too. Frodo is trying to parse, what are you, right? You're not a hobbit, right? You're not a man. Remember, there's that ambiguity about Tom Bombadil from the beginning, right? He's too tall for a hobbit, but not quite big enough for one of the big people. From the very first time Frodo sees him, he can't categorize Tom Bombadil. And ever since that day, no one has been able to categorize Tom Bombadil exactly. But anyhow, this is clearly what Frodo is interested in, right? So when Frodo asks Goldberry who Tom Bombadil is, right, and she doesn't have a clear answer to that question, she doesn't give a clear answer to that, that's when she says, he is, right? He is as you have seen him, right? She's like, and Tom Bombadil, when Frodo asks him, who are you, right, he's like, hey, what? Don't you know my name yet? That's the only answer. And that's when he starts giving his, Tom was here before the rivers and the trees. Tom calls him, he is oldest and fatherless, right? So I think in calling himself fatherless, he is indicating to the hobbits, right? I'm not a mortal creature, right? Let me just put that out on the table, right? And by oldest, is this a positive claim on Tom Bombadil's part that he was the first of all of the spirits, the first of all the Ainur to enter into Arda? I don't know. No, I don't. Does that necessarily mean that? I don't think that necessarily means that. Would I put it past him? No. If it turned out that Tom Bombadil really was the first of all of the Ainur to descend into Arda, and so he comes down first of all, and he plops himself down, you know, in the patch of ground that will someday become the old forest, and is like, I'm here first. I like it here. I'm going to stay here until Arda is dissolved at the end of time. It wouldn't shock me, right? I could totally believe that if it turned out that were true. But is that necessarily something that he is saying, that he means when he says oldest? I don't really know. I don't think so. Again, I kind of would want to say, remember his audience here. He's talking to hobbits, right? So, but by saying he's fatherless, he's saying, I'm not a mortal being like you are at all. By saying oldest, he's saying, I've been here. Remember, it's in the context of him saying, I've been here before this and before that and before this and before that. I've always been here for longer than you could possibly think. I am the oldest, right? Whereas when Treebeard is called eldest by Celeborn, he is eldest clearly in a different sense. Treebeard is the oldest living mortal thing that they're, on the, east of the sea. So, that's a big deal, but he's not in competition with Tom Bombadil. I mean, he's a totally different order of being than Tom Bombadil. Oh, and let me respond, Veronica, let me respond to that. I know there are a lot of people who like to think that Tom Bombadil is Iluvatar personified. There was a time in my life when I was really drawn to that theory just because I thought it would be awesome, because it would be kind of awesome. It would be kind of awesome, not just if Iluvatar were personified in the world in some way, which is an idea that Tolkien kind of played with, but no, he's not. But anyway, not only is it cool, would it be cool if Iluvatar were personified somewhere in Arda, but it would be triple cool if he personified himself as Tom Bombadil, right? If it turned out that dude with the the blue jacket and the yellow boots was like the Lord God Almighty, like that would be kind of awesome, right? Talk about like incognito, right? But it's yeah, okay. So but no, it's not. Tolkien actually addressed this really directly. The primary the root of that theory. There's no evidence of any kind that leads anyone to think, there's nobody in the book suspects, and no hint is given that could be true, right? The whole origin of the theory that Tom Bombadil is Iluvatar personified comes in Goldberry's statement when Frodo asks who he is, and Goldberry responds by saying he is, right? And many readers from the very beginning, for the very first audience that first read it when it came out in 1954, Tolkien was receiving letters about this like within a year, right, of the Lord of the Ring, of the Fellowship of the Ring being published. He was receiving letters from people saying, "Is Tom Bombadil God?" Right, and the reason is the similarity between he is and I am that I am, right, the name of God from Exodus. And Tolkien immediately responded to this and was like, no. And what he explains is, he says, first of all, he is not the same as I am, right? I mean, like, there's a similarity there, but there's a very significant difference, right? But Tolkien's emphasis when he responded to that theory was, it's not just that he isn't God, it's that you're missing. It's not just that you're misunderstanding or hearing something that isn't there. It's that you're missing the point of what is there, right? When Goldberry is talking about that, she's not talking about his essence, like, his name, capital N name is he is, right? Because if so, that would be like a little bit godlike, but that's not what she's doing. Remember, she follows that up, right? She says he is, and then she pauses, but then she goes on and says, he is as you have seen him, right? And remember, when he responds to the question, he says, what? Don't you know my name yet? That's the only answer. And then he turns to Frodo and says, and who are you, alone, yourself, and nameless, right? That is, if Frodo Baggins isn't the answer to who are you, what is the answer, right? That is to say, what the subject of conversation there is not the essence of Tom Bombadil. The subject of conversation, as Tolkien explained, is the nature of names, the nature and importance of names themselves. And that's what Goldberry's talking about and pointing to when she says he is, right? So, anyway, so that's as I said, I always kind of there was a time in my life when I was very attracted to this reading, but it pretty clearly doesn't work, and you have to kind of let it go, sadly. But it's still kind of a fun idea. But anyway, yeah. So no, he's not Arrow. And yes, Aerithert, I too have read that internet joke article saying that Bombadil is actually Morgoth re-embodied. No, he's not actually. It's that article. I mean, I found that article really funny, which tries to depict, Tom Bombadil as this insidious evil character. I find that article really funny until somebody wants to take it seriously, and then it starts to really annoy me. So, Tony, I hadn't forgotten. I know it seems like I've so far wandered away and we're talking about Tom Bombadil now, but I totally have not forgotten, Tony. I was about to follow the breadcrumb of my thoughts back to your original question, which was the nameless thing. So having talked now at some length about this question of age and comparative age in Middle-earth, what then about the nameless things? Okay, so in what sense, then, are the nameless things older, unknown to Sauron because they are older than he? I think, based on, again, how we see that concept of older and oldest being used, that it means they have been in the world and been down there longer than Sauron has, right? So what Gandalf seems to be pointing to is... and he does this many times, right? There's this tendency, and I don't mean tendency in readers of the book. I mean tendency in characters within the book to think in oversimplistic binary terms, right? There are good guys and there are bad guys, and the whole world is divided into good guys and bad guys, right? And if there is a creature that is hostile and apparently malevolent, right, it must be a servant of Sauron, obviously, right? That is, the company tends to think this way, and Gandalf corrects them on several occasions. We get that with the Watcher in the Water. We get that sense with Carathras explicitly. We're reminded of that in his description of his trip through his visit to the Foundations of Stone, right? Gandalf's, that is, and that is this sense that, okay, yes, there are creatures down there. There are horrible creatures down there. They're nameless because there's nobody to give them a name. No one has ever given them a name, but they've been there for a very long time, right? So long that Sauron has never heard of them, has never met them, right? And because they've been just down there, the world is gnawed by nameless things, right? They've just been down there gnawing on the world, right, for millennia and millennia, and no one has ever encountered them before, including Sauron, right? So when it says they're older than he, again, does that literally mean they entered Arda prior to his entering of Arda? Maybe, but I certainly can't imagine that Gandalf is meaning to say something as precise as that when he's making that speech. It just doesn't sound like that's what he's saying, right? So when he says they are older than he, what I understand Gandalf to mean by that is simply they have been down there much longer than Sauron has been in this part of the world, right? Sauron is a newcomer. Sauron is a recent phenomenon. Certainly Sauron of Mordor, right? Sauron, the Dark Lord of Mordor, who is our primary concern just now. This is like this week's problem, right? The nameless things have been there, they've been in there all year, right? Whereas Sauron is this week's problem. So that's what I think Gandalf means when he says that the world is gnawed by nameless things. So you see, Tony, how important it was to do all that Tom Bombadil talk. Okay, not quite all the time. I did get diverted there a little bit, but it was totally cool. Anyway, why I wanted to set up the thing about what exactly it means, right? What does older mean when you're talking about immortal spirits? So I think that's how I understand that phrase. Anyway, Cool. All right. Good. Excellent. Okay. Hey, who is making a Song of Ice and Fire reference? Do Balrogs have wings? Are you trolling me right now, Gilglir? Oh, hang on. I missed your Martin reference. Oh, the Children of the Forest. Right. Okay, I see. Right. Got it. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I have no objection to making Martin references. I'm not a Martin fan. In fact, I'm kind of unfriends with Martin. But I don't like resent him or anything. I have no objection to people referring to him. And I've given up on reading them. I've read through the first 3 books, but I'm not going on until I have a very good reason. Such as, for instance, the publication of the final book in the series. I feel the same way about Patrick Rothfuss. I really love The Name of the Wind, but I refuse to read book 2 until he publishes book 3. Like I won't. I can't. I'm just not going to do that. So, like he can darn well publish book 3, and then I will finish his series and talk about the rest of them. Okay, yeah, so Gilgir is totally trolling me, and if I won't answer the do Balrogs have wings question, no, they don't. Then why didn't they use the eagles to fly to Mordor? Yeah, you're totally trolling me. How do I feel about JKR? I like JKR. I like Rowling. I think the Harry Potter stories are good. They're not great, but they're good. I like them. I mean, yeah. I can speak for, I mean, they're fine. They're good. I like it. I mean, I've read the Harry Potter series 4 or 5 times, but, Maven, I was pretty sure who Gilglir was, there. So yeah, that's, thanks for confirming my suspicion there, Maven. Cool. Yes. Yeah, good. Let's see. Oh, you meant her continually adding fuel to the fire. Yeah, that is, I would probably say that's the one thing that I dislike most about Rowling. I really like J.K. Rowling's stories. I dislike J.K. Rowling's activities in the press. I wish she would just be quiet and let her stories speak for themselves. But whatever. Yeah, exactly. The deader, the better. That's why, give me dead authors all the time. That way, dead authors, one thing you can always count on dead authors for is that they stop having awkward press conferences. So that's cool. But anyway. Okay. Wow. Okay, Aeritherd, I'm really tempted to take you up on that, because I think almost the opposite to you. I won't go so far as the first 5 books, but I think that the earlier ones are the good ones, and the later ones are kind of painful. But I don't want to just get distracted into a Harry Potter conversation, though, especially since I always end up getting boxed into a corner of sounding like I'm a total Harry Potter hater, which I'm absolutely not. But yeah. So no, I'm not gonna be goaded that way either. Keep trying, Gilglir. Keep trying. Maybe you'll find a topic you can goad me into saying indiscreet things about sooner or later. But other questions. I don't want to just now meander totally off into completely different fandom conversations. Other Tolkien questions. Tony's was on a roll here with several really good ones. Anybody else have any other questions or topics you'd like to hear me address? It's funny because, of course, since we're standing next to the snowball field, I keep getting Cecil Voller, of course, in my chat box counting down, right? So occasionally I'll look down and see 10 seconds until, and I think like somebody's like, I'm like, wait, 10 seconds until I have to stop? No, I don't have to stop yet. So I keep thinking that Cecil is like, calling time on me, but but no, he's not. It's all good. Okay, Finn has a question. Right. Wondered about this for a long time. I realize that the question of where orcs come from is still debatable. Yes, it is. But if we go with the mainstream belief that they were created from the corruption of elves, then my question is, okay, are orcs immortal? Gorbag and Shagrat seem to make references to the good old days, and it sounds to me like, yes, that they're talking about back in the First Age, right? Since they talk about the Great Siege, which seems to mean the Battle of Dagorlad, yeah. Probably, yeah. Okay, no idea. We know so little about orcs, right? I mean, there are lots of questions that we might like answered about orc society and orc like basic sort of anthropological or even, you know, basic sort of biological or zoological questions about orcs, such as, for instance, their life expectancy, right? But we don't know. We don't know. No indication is ever given anywhere about this. I don't think that yeah, I mean, Gilglier asks an excellent question. Are orc women fighting in wars, or are they basically baby making machines? Which one seems more likely? See, Gilglier, I would think, left to themselves, I would think that orc women would be out fighting. That would be my guess, right? If I had to guess, to imagine an orc culture, like a free-ranging orc culture, right? You know, with no big bosses around, as Shagrat and Gorbag might say. I would imagine that the orc women would be aggressive as well. It would not surprise me to find orc culture, sort of natural orc culture, being not wholly unlike Klingon culture in that way. But I've been watching a lot of Star Trek lately, and I was just thinking about this. I was watching a Klingon episode last night, and was thinking about exactly. I was like, actually, that's kind of. I was watching the Next Generation episode when Riker does the exchange program on the Klingon vessel, and as I was watching this last night, I was actually thinking about that. I was like, you know, this is actually a lot like I kind of always pictured orc culture. Anyway. Anyhow, okay. So, that's how I always, I would picture it. But the thing we have to remember, orcs almost never are living in natural circumstances, right? Orcs from the beginning, from their inception, are slaves, right? And they even sort of culturally are enslaved. So I would think orcs, when based in Thangorodrim in the First Age under Morgoth, and orcs in Mordor, I gotta think the women are at home pumping out babies constantly, right? Because breeding more orcs and expanding his armies, since the orcs are being seen, they're just a means to an end, right? And certainly to maximize his soldiery. Now there might be a percentage of the women, I don't know, probably Sauron and Melkor do the math, right? And figure out what percentage of the female population is needed. Do you keep every female constantly impregnated? Maybe you do, right? Maybe some of the females get to fight and some of them stay home and have babies. I don't know, right? But I gotta think that, because Saruman would do that. Of course, we know Saruman would do other, even more unspeakably horrible things. But anyway, I gotta think that the Dark Lords who enslave them, and think about them only as pawns and soldiers, would definitely just keep the orc women pregnant all the time. I would imagine as well. Again, there's no record of this anywhere, but I would have to guess that the orc gestation period must be really short. Right? I don't know how long it is that orc women are pregnant, before they pop out baby orcs. But I've got to think it's really because I would have to think that would be one of the things that Morgoth would do right at the beginning. We know that Morgoth is putting his own spirit, and he's dispersing his own power amongst his slaves in order to sort of enhance them. And I gotta think this is one of the enhancements that he would make. Rapid gestation would have to be one of the improvements that would come out of, sort of the orc branch of Morgoth's R&D department. Clearly. And yes, I would suspect that the maturation period is shorter too. Absolutely. So yeah, because again, it's all about efficiency, right? So presumably they would also probably attain full growth quicker and start their military training, when they're toddlers, right? Clearly, right? So anyway, I that's definitely how I would imagine it would work for orcs. But see, this is where now looping back around to, and I'm trying to forget the who was it who asked? Finn. I forgot who asked the question in the first place. So Finn, when you were asking this question, this is why I don't think it's obvious, right? That is, I don't think it follows naturally upon the idea of orcs being corrupted elves. I wouldn't say, well, that must mean that their lives are also coterminous with Arda, like elves are, right? Because I would expect that the corruption of elves could be taken to include that. That is, elves have it in their being. Their life is bound to Arda. Could that be changed? Is that something that Morgoth could warp? I mean, I don't know the answer to that question. You could say, well, it's in their nature, put in their nature by Iluvatar, right? Yes, but there are other things about their natures that were given to them by Iluvatar, which Morgoth clearly corrupts, right? In corrupting them into orcs. So maybe the spirit within them, the elves have spirits in bodies, of course, like humans do. They're Fea and they're Hroa, to give the elvish name that Tolkien gives to these things later on. It's the Fea of elves where sort of the fire of their spirit lives, and which they use to re-embody themselves. So when an elf dies and goes back to Valinor, their spirit returns, their Fea returns to Valinor. But they can eventually manifest a new Hroa. They can get a new body. That's what happened to Glorfindel, right? He died. His original body, his original Hroa, presumably decomposes in the natural order. So there's like a Glorfindel skeleton up in the mountains, where he was buried. His spirit goes back to Valinor. It gets a new Hroa eventually, and he comes back to Middle-earth. Does that mean that in theory Glorfindel could visit his own grave and see his own original skeleton? Yes, it's underwater probably, but in theory, right? Could he dive for it? Quite likely. Anyway. That's how it works with elves, right? So what would happen with that whole system with orcs? You've got to think that the primary thing that Morgoth was targeting would be their Fea, right? That he would do something to that the corruption of them, in order for it to be corruption of them, would be corruption of their Fea, of their spirits in some ways. And what would he do, and how would he affect it, and what could he do? I don't really know. But this is why, nobody knows. It's all pure speculation, right? But this is why it wouldn't shock me at all to find that the immortality that was native to their beings, right, was able to be kind of shifted around. Maybe he even kind of takes the longevity of the elves and makes them maybe this is where the spirit that burns hotter and quicker within them to make them have shorter gestational periods and grow up faster. Maybe that's one of the things that he does to them, right? And thus shortens their lives. I don't really know, right? Again, this is all pure speculation. As far as the actual lines that Shagrat and Gorbag have, Finn, that you were referring to a while back, we can understand those lines as if Shagrat and Gorbag personally remember the old days, right? At the least, at and before the time of the the time of the Great Siege, right? If it's the siege of Mordor, unless the Great Siege was the siege of Thangorodrim, right, at the end of the first age. You know, again, it's you can read it that way, right? You can read it that way. Of course, it's not necessary to that reading, that is to say, the reading that Shagrat and Gorbag themselves personally remember the Elder Days, is not an inescapable reading at all. It's a possible reading. I will certainly grant it as a possible reading. I don't consider it an inevitable reading. There are other readings which to me make at least as much sense. And that is, they could easily be talking about stories, just like everybody else talks about the Elder Days, right? You know, Sam talks about the Elder Days. Remember, you know, Sam and Frodo talk about the Elder Days all the time. And yet, remember, Frodo is still shocked when he finds out that Elrond personally remembers the Elder Days, right? Remember the moment when Frodo puts his foot in his mouth at the Council of Elrond, right? When he when Elrond is saying, "I remember the banners," right? When he's remembering the last alliance and the host of Gil-galad, and Frodo actually is so surprised that he bursts out tactlessly, right? But I thought that, you know, the fall of Gil-galad was a long ago time, right? He just can't even really parse that Elrond is personally retains those memories, right? My point is just, Frodo would talk about the Elder Days too, right? And yet the idea of personally remembering them is still mind-blowing to him. So I don't think we need to read those that way. I think that we can just now, Finn, you have a different point there. It's true that the goblins not only know about Orcrist and Glamdring, but they recognize them on sight, right? You know, these ancient swords from fallen Gondolin, and they just one look at them and they're like, beater and biter, right? They know just what these are, which suggests that there's this like incredibly detailed oral tradition among or maybe it's not oral, right? Maybe there are orc libraries somewhere, you know, goblin libraries, or maybe just like posters, right? Like public service, goblin public service posters, you know, like, you know, if you see this sword, beware, you know, like, so that goblins grew up surrounded by posters with pictures of Glamdring on it, right? That said, you know, like beater up above it. You know, if you see this sword, run away. Yeah, you know, it's, who knows, right? Who knows? I kind of doubt that is true. But see, but Finn, the problem here is it's a perfect example. You can't go back to The Hobbit for this kind of thing. The Hobbit won't bear that kind of investigation. The Hobbit is not part of this world, and it's not designed with the kind of level of detail and the kind of continuity that that the Lord of the Rings and the Silmarillion have, or at least are given later on down the road. It's just not fair. You just can't do that to The Hobbit. Tolkien wasn't in that mode. He wasn't integrating everything. There are lots of things in The Hobbit that just don't fit. They just don't jive with the rest of the world that Tolkien created. So, yeah. So yeah. I would say, Bealver is saying, are they the stories that the young goblins get told during their 15-minute childhoods? Yeah, exactly. They don't have much time as a child, so they fill it with stories about beater and biter. Anyway, yeah. So like I said, we don't know, I mean, almost anything about orcs. There's so little that we know for certain about orcs and orc culture. But yeah, I don't think we, you know, all we can do if we want to try to answer the questions is just kind of first acknowledge that there's no certain answer about them, and then just put together the facts that we have and speculate based on what we can see, which I've always thought is a really fun game. And and of course is very much the kind of fun that that the Lotro folks have always had in making the game. So anyway, I think it's they don't seem to usually ask that kind of question, like the origin of orcs, but we do get some little glimpses into orc culture in different quests and quest lines, which I always found really interesting. All right, so I think we have, as Maven is reminding me, we have now officially exceeded our time. So I don't want to keep you guys. You guys, your characters are probably going to have to get up, and it's probably going to be hard to stand up because your backsides will probably be frozen to the tundra here in the Yopari. You better stand up and jump around and several people falling over as they're attempting to stand up. I know exactly. You gotta get the circulation going again. But thanks everybody. Thank you very much for having me. I have enjoyed, as always, coming to talk to you guys, and thanks for helping us, by the way, sort of experimenting with new interfaces, doing this on Twitch and in Discord as well, trying to get that stuff all together. So we're experimenting. Before I go, let me just make sure you guys know about the new thing that I'm doing, because I think you guys might be interested. So I want to make sure you guys have heard about it. So in January, I'm starting a new thing, which is going to be super fun. I'm going to do a chapter by chapter discussion of the Lord of the Rings. I'm going to go through the Lord of the Rings more slowly and in more detail than I ever have in my entire life before. If you've read my Hobbit book, it's going to be kind of like that, where I go through chapter by chapter through the entire Lord of the Rings. And it's going to be awesome. I'm going to spend at least 1 week on every single chapter of the Lord of the Rings. And I'm going to host it in game, because there are going to be 2 parts to it. So this character that I'm in here tonight, this is Narnion. He is my host. Narnion is his Sindarin name. Nyarion is the Quenya version on some servers. He has his Quenya name. On others, he has his Sindar name. His Sindarin name. His name basically means the story guy. So it's really fun. Anyway, so the story guy and I here are going to be hosting the Lord of the Rings discussion here in game. We're working on an in-game lecture hall, which I know Man of Tales, but the story guy is my translation, Gilglir. Gilglir, of course, helped me. I have to give props to Gilglir for actually helping me with the Elvish translation there. Anyway, so what more information on where exactly we're going to meet. I'm going to rotate among some different servers. So we're going to be kind of sponsored by different kinships on different servers. For most of the class, I'm planning to meet for about 2-hour sessions. That's sort of my typical session length. And for the first part of it, for the first hour and a half of it, we're just going to talk about the books. We're just going to have a straight up discussion. I'll put passages of text on screen. I'm going to broadcast it on Twitch. So if you go, you can go to our Signum Twitch channel, and we'll be doing audio and text chat here in Discord like we are here tonight. So we'll be having an open discussion on the chapter from starting with the Fellowship of the Ring. We're going to start with chapter 1, by the way. We're going to start with the long expected party. We're not going to start with the prologue. We'll come back to the prologue later on. Tolkien didn't write the prologue first, so we're going to start with chapter 1, and then we'll do the prologue at the end at the same time we do the appendices, and then at the end of the session, so for like the last half hour or two, every week we'll do a field trip, and we'll go to the part of Lotro which either depicts the portion of the story or relates to the portion of the story that we discussed that week, or where we see elements or characters or quest lines which are related to, which basically sort of serve as adaptations of material from that chapter. So we'll have a weekly book discussion followed immediately by weekly field trip where we look at the particular adaptation of that part of the story in Lotro. So I'm really looking forward to that. So we're going to start off. So for instance, for the first week, we're going to go to the party tree. So for the first week, we're going to be here in Landreval. The first session will be on Tuesday night, January 3rd, which happens to be Tolkien's 125th birthday. And we're going to start at 9:30 p.m. server time, and it will be recorded. You'll be able to see the video on YouTube, and we'll extract the audio as well. So you should be able to get an audio feed as well as a video feed if you want to watch it later on. I am, of course, joined here in game by my sidekick. What was the adjective, Maven, that you used for the, I know we've got my ginger-haired hobbit sidekick, but I forgot the adjective you used. It wasn't obstreperous, was it? But it could be. My obstreperous sidekick. Anyway, whatever. Here's Maven is my sidekick here, and what she will be doing especially will be helping with sort of the in-game logistics. It won't be that difficult when we're starting off and going to places like the party tree, but of course as we move through the Lord of the Rings, it'll get a little bit more challenging to navigate to our field trip spot. Incorrigible, that was it, Maven. Thank you. So she will be helping with organizing, getting folks to where we're going to end up and stuff, so we can see that. So absolutely, Tellurian, she is absolutely my Samwise here, who is going to be as Frodo said, he wouldn't have gotten far without her, right? So that's exactly it. So, all right. Very good. Exactly. Gilguir was just quoting out the line, typing out the line that I was thinking of. So no. Narnion would not have gotten far without Maven. So hopefully, Vera, we won't get to the point where she actually needs to carry me on her back, but I'm sure she's game if it comes to that. So there we are. I like the posturing. Yeah, it's good. Very good. So as I said, we'll have an update. We're gonna be we hope we're being based in Bree. We're trying to get a lore hall set aside for us, which should be really fun. So anyway, we'll have more on that, but you can certainly come and tune in on our Twitch channel. I would encourage you to favorite our channel. If you go to twitch.tv/signumu, you can follow us by clicking on the little heart icon, and that way you'll get notifications not only when it's time for exploring the Lord of the Rings, which is what we're calling the segment, but I also do other lore streams. If you want to see me exploring Rohan, which is where I am up to with my highest level character, Wigand, the Guardian. Wigand is in Rohan. He's not been back for a while. I've been too busy, but I'm totally going to get back to Wigand. I actually hope to do some Wigand broadcasts this Christmas time when I'm on vacation. But anyway, so I do those spontaneously. I've been doing a series actually of Twitch streams with my 8-year-old son. He is very keen to do streams, and so he has a couple Lotro characters which he has named after Pokemon. So you can see Wigand and his well, actually it's not with Wigand, but you can see my young sidekick Charmandy. Wait a second. Actually, I am the sidekick to Charmandy, who is obviously the protagonist. So you can see our adventures there. And again, we don't really schedule those in advance. So if you favorite the channel, you'll get a notification when we come on. But anyway, It's all fun. So Tony, yeah, we'll be doing the discussions on Discord here like this, so that we can use this for a text interface, which can be real time. And this way also you can keep like the chatting to each other can happen on the Twitch chat, so you can use that for kind of chatter back and forth, and then use the Discord channel for talking to me basically, so that I don't have to sift. It's hard for me to kind of sift through everybody's comments. If everybody's chatting to each other as well as to me, they get kind of washed downstream pretty quickly. So that's what we're going to use Discord for. And then that way you'll be able to hear also when we're in game together, you'll be able to hear my audio in real time rather than, at the delay, like the 5-second delay or whatever that Twitch gives for it. So, all right. Excellent. So that's all. And I will hand things over. Thanks to Lonely Mountain Band for hosting us here again today. Thanks for having us, and I hope to be able to come back and join you guys another time at Ales and Tales. So thanks very much. Bye, everybody.